Welcome to my world history notes where I read from the book I wrote to teach homeschoolers about world history called A Bible Believer Looks at World History, which you can see on lulu.com, amazon.com, or the Bible Baptist bookstore. You might not agree with my conclusions, some of my conclusions, or any of my conclusions, uh, but you should know about the topics that I discuss. So I'm going to continue now reading. According to Durant, the Dorian invasion began around 1100 BC, coming from the north to end the age of heroes. They were herders and hunters who depended on cattle for their livelihood and were therefore semi barbaric by settled agrarian or farming community standards. They brought the Hallstatt iron culture to Greece, named after a town in Austria where Europeans were thought to have started using iron. With these harder weapons, they conquered, where while historians call this the Dorian conquest, the Greeks call this the return of the Heracleidae, or sons of Hercules, coming to take vengeance. The Greek poet Hesiod referred to this age of disorder and political chaos of an interruption in the so-called progress of Greece as the age of iron. For a long time, every aspect of civilization was reduced to a limited scale, but contrary to some historians who say that all evidence of human activity ceases, there was life, albeit crude life by previous standards. The Mycenaean civilization was not completely destroyed, and many elements of it passed down to democratic Greece. Greek speaking refugees from the earlier cultures fled to the Aegean Sea islands and the western Asia coast to found city states there and mingled with the merchant families who had preceded them in all likelihood. These populations of Greek speaking people were called Ionian. In addition, these refugees and later expatriates, former citizens of a particular country who have left for various reasons to live somewhere else, these expatriates formed the core of Greek mercenaries or soldiers who fought not for patriotism or duty, but purely for money for the highest bidder or the most convenient. These Greek speaking, excuse me, I'm sorry, these Greek speaking mercenaries were used in virtually every army in the ancient Near East, according to Sergei Yalchev in his book Mercenaries of the Ancient World, with Greeks often fighting Greeks as kings like Nebuchadnezzar and Pharaoh opposed each other. Every ancient army and many more recent ones had contingents of mercenaries, often with the countries with which the employer was at war. For instance, Persia hired a great many Greeks to help them in their failed attempt to conquer Greece. Caesar subdued Gaul, with a large part of his force being Gallic cavalry, and Hitler even used Bosnian Muslim SS volunteers and Croatian Catholic paramilitary to slaughter Serbians during the Serbian Holocaust of World War II, although the latter might not be considered technically to be mercenaries. In the reverse sense, the Greeks had ample opportunity to learn about the stories of the Bible and to create their myths by manipulating these stories for political purposes due to the influx of Jewish children sold as slaves to them by a clear reading of Joel 3:6 taking place at least from the 8th century BC. Greek mercenaries would have introduced many Greek words and cultural practices into the countries in which they offered their services as well. So anytime you have a biblical critic saying they'll say the book of Daniel must have been written much later than it supposedly was because of Greek influences in language and words, that's nonsense because there was Greek influence for 1,000 years before that throughout the ancient Near East. Durant tells us that it was the belief of most Greeks that their culture came from Africa. Afrocentrists have tried to argue this point for years, but have been rebuffed by books such as Not Out of Africa and others, where the Greeks themselves are called liars. The fact is that the Greeks insisted that they derived their science and philosophy from Egypt. Usher has Egyptian king Danaus flee to Greece in 1482, making himself king of the Argos in 1474 BC. Eusebius said that Cecrops, an Egyptian, transported a colony to Attica or Greece and established the Athenian kingdom in 1556 BC. It is known that from the 7th century onwards, under the Saite kings of Egypt, many famous Greeks traveled to Egypt to learn. Men such as Thales, Pythagoras, Solon, Plato, and Democritus visited Egypt. Herodotus and Plutarch claimed that the concept of judgment after death was learned from Osiris and Isis, and that Demeter and Persephone stories taught them about resurrection. Thales of Miletus learned geometry in Egypt. Rhocus and Theodorus of Samos learned the art of hollow casting in bronze and pottery, textiles, metalworking, and ivory. Greece merged its own gods with Bible truths and Egyptian and Assyrian, Canaanite, and Babylonian myths and passed that mixture on to Rome. The Phoenicians also had a great influence upon the Greeks. Greek colonists and merchants landed on every shore in the Mediterranean Sea. The people they found on any of these shores were not used to having the Greek freedom to speak out, to think freely, or to do what they wished. And this contrast with what the Greeks had come to expect out of life made the rest of these people barbaroi, or barbarians, people content to live on myth and without liberty. The modern term Berber for the North African Arab tribes comes from that word also. We're going to stop there and we're going to begin talking about Greek city states and Sparta next. So thank you for watching, and I hope you'll come to your own conclusions by studying history on your own.